Hi everyone, you have Danielle here. I am currently pulling up to the honey farm and I am so excited to explore the bees and the honey and learn all about it on today's virtual field trip. So let's go check it out.
Hello, I am Courtney. This is Jim. We are in Malvern, Pennsylvania at our bee farm, also known as an apiary, and we are getting ready to do a check on one of our hives. So we first have to get ready and put some special clothes on, so we are going to go put our jackets on.
Hello. Just wanted to show you the components that make up a hive. Here I have what's called a nucleus hive, which is a smaller version of the hives that we're going to inspect. But every hive has got a lid, a cover or a roof, an inner cover that helps with ventilation of the hive. And then inside the hive we have a series of frames that the bees work on. So here is a fully combed out frame. So bees will fill up this area with young bees called brood and put honey in the corners here. But a frame like this starts like this. This is just a plastic frame. This is coated with beeswax. And then the bees will actually draw out the frame to look like this. So this is called a hive body. And then of course you have a landing board here and the bottom of the hive.
So the first thing I'm going to do is put on my jacket. And this is a special jacket that's a pretty thick material, kind of like the jeans I'm wearing, that will make it very hard for the bees to sting through it in case they get upset. And it also has this beautiful hood or veil on it. And again, it just keeps the bees away from my face while I'm working with them. In general, bees are super nice. They're more curious if you see them out by the flowers. But since we're going into their home and opening up their hive box if they're used to being very closed, they might get a little bit curious or a little bit angry at us. And that is why we wear the hoods and the jackets. And another thing that I like to do when I check the hives is to make sure they can't get up my pants. So I always put these thick socks on and put them down around my ankles and then put shoes on that I can tie really tightly. Just because, like I said, they're very curious creatures and one might land on the ground and then climb up my shoes. And then I also put these gloves on. These are like a nitrile glove. The bees can sting through these, but it'll make it hurt a little bit less, and it's also a good way to remove the stinger just in case I get stung. But the best thing that we do to avoid the bees getting angry at us is we make a smoker. So you can see it smoking away right there. So when we first go up to a hive, we'll let them know that we're there by putting a little bit of smoke into their opening, their front door here, and then also up above their lid. So that lets them smell the smoke, and it actually tricks them into thinking that there's a forest fire, because bees in the wild would live in the hollowed out log of a tree. So when they think that there's a forest fire going on, their first thought is they have to eat as much honey as they can. Because if they fill their stomachs with honey and their tree burns down, unfortunately, it happens, then they would be able to swarm or fly away altogether and start a new hive with all of that honey that they have saved. So as soon as they smell the smoke, they will go into the hive. You'll see them, instead of hanging out around outside the hive, they'll go into their front door. And then they'll start eating the honey as quickly as they can, and that keeps them very distracted. So while we're going in there and looking at the hives and pulling stuff out, they'll just be thinking honey, 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 and it usually is a good way to calm them down and have them leave us alone while we do our check. All right, so we're gonna give them a little puff of smoke just to let them know that we are here. And that'll tell the bees that are hanging out at the front door that it's time to go inside. And bees produce a really sticky substance called propolis. So that's why we have to pry apart these parts of the lid, because it's so sticky that it holds itself together so well.
It's pretty sticky.
Yeah.
See, those are all bees on there doing their job.
In the hive, each bee has their own role. So everyone has a specific job that they're doing. So the bees at the front of the hive are the guard bees. They make sure that no bees from other hives or other types of insects get in there. There's also nurse bees, so they're taking care of all the eggs and the larvae or the brood in here. The worker bees are the ones that go and get the honey. There's mortuary bees. They're the ones that clear out any bees that die in the hive and make sure that it's clean in there.
Now we're just going to pull one of the 10 frames like we showed before. So in this frame here, the bees are storing nectar or honey. You can kind of see it there. We're going to set that one to the side so that we have plenty of room. Part of the inspection, we're actually looking to see if we find young bees or larvae, or brood it's called. So in here, this area here, those are new bees formed. And in those cells, if you can see, you could see the young larva. So the queen has laid an egg, and now these nurse bees are taking care of that. And this is where your new bees come from. So this whole area here will eventually be filled with larvae, and this is called brood. And in this area here, they're filling with honey, and they'll use that so they have something to eat in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm. It takes an egg 21 days to mature to a full-grown adult bee. So from the time that the queen lays an egg, and that's actually why the black plastic is used. The eggs are white or a little bit opaque. So it's super easy to spot them against the black plastic. And then once that egg develops to the larval stage, the white ones that you saw just then, the worker bees will cap it or put wax on top of it. And then it'll pupate or sort of incubate until the fully formed adult bee chews its way out of that cell. And then she's a worker bee.
Oh, and this frame here, this frame, the bees are filling it up with 100% honey. Here they're still filling it up with honey, and here the cells are filled and they've actually capped it off.
So the nectar that bees get from flowers is what becomes honey. And through the process of the bees feeding it to each other, it transfers in their second stomach called their crop. The mixture of that nectar with their saliva, plus the fact that it's so warm, about 95 degrees inside the hive, and especially in the summer, they're flapping their wings to fan either moisture or just air through the hive to keep it the right temperature. That evaporates or takes out some of the water from the nectar. And once it reaches a certain moisture content, usually under 18%, it means a lot of the water is gone out of the nectar. They cap it, and that's how you know that it's now honey.
Here's a frame that's got brood, like we talked about before, and then honey on the side. They don't really aren't too concerned that we're actually taking them out of the hive.
And actually down here on the bottom, these are what we call the drone cells. So all these bees that you see here, they're all female bees. The smaller bees are females. The hives don't have that many male bees because they don't do as many jobs. In fact, the male bees only have one job, and that's to mate with queens. But the female bees do everything else. They find the nectar and the pollen. They take care of the young eggs. They build up this wax. Everything. Yeah, so this is a drone. So you can see this big bee making his way up here. His eyes are so much bigger they actually touch in the center. That's a drone. So this is a male bee here. But all these other bees around him, they're females. The drones don't have a stinger, so they aren't able to sting or defend the hive. The queen and all the female bees, the female worker bees, they all do have stingers. All right, so it's super important for us to make sure that our bees stay healthy. So as we're going through the hive, you can see these strips, and these strips actually have a special chemical or a medicine in them, and it keeps a parasite called the varroa mite off of our bees. And it's important because that mite could carry diseases, and it also weakens the hive. It attaches itself to the bees and just takes their energy, and it makes them sick. So that's why we have these strips in here. It's part of being a good beekeeper is making sure that our bees stay healthy, not only because we want them to produce delicious honey, but because these bees are flying all over the area and there's a lot of other bees from different hives. And we wouldn't want them to pass any diseases from our hives onto someone else's bees. So that's why it's important for beekeepers to make sure that they're treating for mites, they're treating for beetles, or they're making sure that the beetles don't make their hives too weak, and keeping an eye on those things.
Maybe 20 bees flying around us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is one of our most friendly hives, I would say. They have very good genetics.
You can just go right and look right on the top if you like.
And as we're working, sometimes you'll see some bees that start to face out, like facing up through the seams. That's the guard bees again. Sort of catch on to the fact that we're like opening up their hive. So instead of staying at the front door, they'll just stay in between the frames and just look out at the world, see what's going on.
So this is all that the bees have made.
So we have IPM, or integrated pest management, and we were talking about our strips with the chemicals that control the mites. This is another method for us to not use chemicals to help our hives stay healthy. So this green frame is special because it has larger cells in it. And just give me a moment to squish this beetle. There we go. So
You can see the larvae in there.
yeah, so these larvae are special drone larvae. When the queen encounters bigger cells like this, she knows to lay an unfertilized egg. So these larvae will grow up to be the drones, those big boy bees we talked about, instead of the little worker bees.
There we just smushed it.
They run so fast. All right, so the mites that are a problem for the bees like the larger cells and are more likely to attach to the drones when they're a larva. So we take these green frames out and we put them in the freezer. Now what that does is it kills the mites that might be in there, but it also kills the drones. But since the drones only have one job, and that's to mate with other queens, the hive doesn't need that many of them. And even in the fall, which we're coming up on now, the ladies will actually kick all the boy bees out of the hive and just say, we don't want to feed you our honey for the winter, so get out of here. So it doesn't hurt the hive that we take the drones out and that we put them in the freezer, which does kill them. It's actually our way of keeping the hive even healthier. And a couple of times I squished a little hive beetle that was running around on the frame. The bees will chase down the beetles and get rid of them, but sometimes we just give them a little hand if we see one. So we're gonna pull this out and put it in the freezer. You might notice that all these bees down here are suddenly outside of the hive, but the queen releases a special scent, and it's called a pheromone, and the bees know to follow their queen's scent, so that's how they know which hive is theirs. And if we were to move the queen, that's how they know where to go. So eventually all these bees, when they're done eating their honey or just checking out that hive, will walk their way back up into their hive and back inside.
So to get the bees off this frame, you have to do a little shake. And there they are. They all come off.
It doesn't hurt the bees at all. And if any are left behind, we just gently brush them off.
Give them a little brush. And now here's a replacement frame we're going to put inside. And that's a part of a chemical-free way of treating for mites.
Alright, so we talked about how the honey is made from the nectar of the flowers, so now I'm going to show you how we actually get it out of the hive. So this frame is already empty, it doesn't have any honey in it, but we're going to pretend. So usually when these frames are full, they'll have some caps on them, and that just keeps the honey at the right moisture level. So first we'll have to scrape off those caps, and we have a little fork that we use to do it. Because if we were to leave the caps on and spin it, it's not enough force to actually break the honey through those caps. So first we scrape the caps off, and of course, since nothing is wasted, we save those caps to get our beeswax for our candles. And then once we have the caps off, it goes into our extractor. So this is a nifty little machine that holds 2 frames at a time, but it only spins the honey out of one side of a frame at a time. So this goes in here sideways like this. And then of course we would put our second one in here to keep it even while we're spinning it, because we don't want it to be off balance. We close our lid, and then we have this handle here that lets us crank our honey around. So when we engage it, it's actually spinning this frame in here. We'll let it come to a rest. So when we do that, it doesn't take a lot of time. If you spin it really fast, you can really get the honey out. And then of course we have to do the other side, so I'll flip it. Put it back in, close the lid, crank it up again, and all the honey comes out on the sides of the container, and gravity takes it down to the bottom where we have this little spigot. And once we have enough honey in here that we can't move this anymore because it starts to hit the bottom of the frames, that's when we open up this spout and we pour out all of our golden honey into, we usually use a glass bottle. The next step, once we have that honey, since there's still a lot of comb in it, a lot of that wax, sometimes an errant bee will get in there, so a bee is in our honey. We filter it with a pretty large strain filter, and that just gets rid of the comb that's in there, any bees that happen to get in our honey, and then that is what we bottle up, put our little label on, and sell to our customers or give away to our friends and our family. Put in our coffee, drizzle it on our fruits in the morning. That is the full process from hive to honey jar for the honey. So here we have a little rainbow sampler of the different honey that we've collected this summer. And this was the first honey that we pulled off of our hives. And at this point, the bees were going out and foraging or looking for food on a lot of different trees. The trees were the first thing to have their flowers open. And of course, the bees are attracted to the pollen inside those flowers. So they were going in, and this is mainly, I think we have some Russian olives around. Bees really like that type of tree. And then in the middle of the summer, this is the color of the honey that we spun out of the hives. At this point, it's a little bit of a mix. So we have a lot of flowers, just decorative things that we had opening around the bees. Still some trees that were in flower that the bees were going to. And then this last honey is what we pulled off about a month ago, so I'd say in July. And this is clover honey. So around that time is when all the little Dutch clovers come up in the yard, and the bees love it. It's so fun to just sit and watch them visiting the clovers. Even the bumblebees too really like that one. And that creates a very dark colored honey just because that nectar is a different color. If you ever look inside a flower, you can see the little nectar in there, the pollens are different colored. Some are even purple. It's so cool. So that is why different honeys are different colors you might see in the supermarket, or if you buy your honey locally, it might not always look the same throughout the year. This is one of my favorite plants. It's called a Russian sage, and the reason I like it so much is because it attracts so many species of bees, so many different types of bees. We've been looking at a lot of honeybees, but the native bees are actually the ones that need our help the most. So honeybees are not native to the Americas. They were brought over as livestock from Europe. There's a lot who come from Italy. There's some Russian bees now, but our American bees love this as well as the honeybees, and this is a great place to come and just look at them all. So I see a honeybee right there. There are some bumblebees that were kind of buzzing around earlier. This really small metallic green bee here is a great pollinator. These days there's a lot of smaller bee species that are hanging out at the sagebush, but it's important to help them out. So how do we help out our native bees? Well, it's important to give them something to eat. So bees, all types of bees, love flowers. They love the pollen. They go in there and they drink the nectar, and when they're inside the flower drinking that nectar is when they get the pollen stuck to them, and then they visit other flowers, other plants, and that's how that pollen spreads and pollinates our plants and helps them produce. So that's why they're called pollinator species. And they need a lot of things to eat. Unfortunately, if we have our grass cut down and everything is just not really allowed to flower, then they don't have a lot of sources to eat. It's also important in the summer to give them something to drink. So if you just put a little bucket of water out with some corks floating in it so they don't drown, that's a great thing to make sure that your bees are doing okay and have enough water. They also need natural places to live. So not clearing all the dead sticks and leaves out of your yard is a great way to give them places to build their nests. Honeybees like to live with a group, a big group of a couple thousand other bees, but there are a lot of solitary bee species who just will live inside a little branch or stick. So we need to give them things that they can live in and actually be safe and protected. And it's important, of course, to look into the native species to your area. Not a great example with my Russian sage, but there's so many native plants in our area, so if you can keep those genetics around, it's super important. They're going to be the most adaptable to the conditions in your area. They'll attract the most native bee species and give them something to eat. And they're super easy to grow. A lot of them you can just throw the seeds in the ground and it'll really just take off and do the work itself. Yeah. We have a couple of pollinator gardens starting this year, but it takes about a year for them to really get established. So a lot of us, if we haven't spent a lot of time around bees or other bugs and insects, it can be super scary, especially the wasps, which are also important pollinators, so we want to be very careful around them. The first thought is often, oh no, I don't want to get stung. But it's actually a huge compliment if a honeybee lands on you because she thought you were a flower. You're so sweet. So if a bee is ever bothering you, flying around you, or even lands on you, we don't want to swat it, we don't want to hit it, we don't want to brush it away. Instead, the best thing that you can do is blow a bee away, because that movement of air will actually encourage them to just be on their way and fly away, and you don't have to worry about getting stung. So nothing ever goes to waste here. So all of the wax that we scrape off that the bees built in the wrong place or that was on top of those frames, or the cappings that were holding the honey into the frames, we scrape all them off, and we have wax that's mixed with honey. Sometimes it's mixed with cocoons, or it's just dirty because all those little bee feet were on it for so long. So what we can do is still use it. So we melt it down once and it creates this kind of clean wax on top, but then the dirty wax on the bottom. And then after we filter it another time, and it's called rendering or cleaning our beeswax, we are left with this solid, beautiful chunk of just pure beeswax. So this is what you can use to make beeswax candles. It does burn really well. It actually captures any impurities that are in the air instead of releasing impurities like some other candle types. Smells great, and you can use it for lip balms or lotions, all that cool stuff. So yeah, and anything that we can't use here, we give back to the bees and they will use it in their hive, so nothing is wasted. So I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about our bees today. It has been so fun to get to show you this hobby to you guys, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your virtual field trips. All right, bye.